Hello everyone, and welcome to today's installment of the Pisces Guide to Pop Culture. I'm of course your host, TJ West. And I want to share with you today my feelings on Deep House, subtitled The Gayest Story Ever Told by Jeremy Atherton Lynn. And if you're wondering why I'm not showing the actual book cover on my Kindle, it's because there's a naked butt on it. This is a gay story after all, and I ended up having that photo taken down from Instagram, and I know how touchy the AIs and all that and the censors can be here at TikTok and elsewhere. So to save myself the likelihood of it being taken down, I thought, well, I'll just put up the title page. Not ideal, but it'll work. If you're familiar with Jeremy Atherton Lynn, you might probably from his earlier book, Gay Bar, which was a huge success, earned all sorts of well-deserved praise for the way that it combines what we might call memoir / cultural history, examining the institution of the gay bar and what it meant to both him personally, but also what it meant to the gay community. And similarly, in Deep House, he is exploring his relationship with Famous, his husband, as well as the sort of growth of gay marriage legislation and how that intersects with issues of migration and immigration status and all of that stuff sort of percolating from roughly like the 1960s up to the late 2010s when he ends up getting married in the UK with Famous, who is from the UK. So, if you've read anything by Jeremy Atherton Lynn, you'll know that he has a really how do I want to describe it? Well, it is explicit, but I mean something more profound than that. He really has a way of capturing the earthiness and the embodied nature of gay identity. Like, he has a way of describing what sex is like as a gay man in a way that I think is deeply evocative. It's provocative as well, but I think that for any of us who have bodies and enjoy sex, anal sex and otherwise, I think that there's a lot to be gained from how Atherton Lynn writes, just because I think he is so adept at capturing, the lived experience of what it's like to be a gay person. Obviously, at the same time as he's sort of grappling with his relationship with Famous over these decades, he's also looking at the transformation of marriage law and immigration law, both in the U.S. and abroad. And, that's why I think this book is so vitally important. I mean, we're now living in a post-Obergefell world, so it's hard to imagine what it was like before that. Gay marriage is just so ubiquitous in American culture, and it's obviously very common across the globe. Not very common, but it's roughly common in, say, the global north as opposed to the global south. But I'm old enough to remember when that wasn't the case. I came of age. I'm a few years younger than Lynn, but I came of age too in the 80s and 90s when gay marriage was a chimera, not something. And for many of us, before 2015 in Obergefell, it seemed like that was just never going to happen. It was just too controversial. And, I think that that's one of the powerful things that what Lynn's book does very well is sort of show us the ways in which this discourse unfolded in the 90s, particularly when we see, the Defense of Marriage Act, when we see Democrats being sort of bludgeoned by the newly resurgent religious right and Republicans. And, I think that part of what gives this book its unique power is that Lynn's sort of skill at combining the specific in his own biography and his own romance with Famous with the broader contours. And I think that that's a very interesting and also compelling ways of writing of a memoir like this, is showing how one queer couple's life intersects with broader forces that are taking place both in the U.S. and obviously in the U.K. And it's also what makes this book so relevant today, since we're seeing this movement in the U.S., certainly a sort of deeply xenophobic movement against immigrants of all kinds, as well as against queer people. There's no denying that that's kind of the world we're living in. And so, it's useful to see how far we've come, but it's also helpful to see how it's never been easy, that we've had to fight tooth and nail for everything that we've gained. And I'm not sure that Jeremy Atherton Lynn would agree. I tend to be more of the sort of assimilationist strand of queer activism, that it's really helpful to get legal rights and representation and recognition. I'm not really about blowing up the system, but that's a whole different discussion. I think that for Lynn's purposes, he is much more aligned with a sort of more queer, subversive, radical approach. But I think that's great. And I think that's what works so well in this book, is that it enables different kinds of discussions to be had about these subjects. And I mean, to sort of put it bluntly, I just love the way that he writes. I think that he has a sort of poetic soul that finds its expression in prose, if that makes sense. I think that that's my way of putting it. And I think that's why I find his books, both this one and Gay Bar, so deeply resonant. Obviously, I haven't faced the same struggles as Lynn, other than I too am a struggling writer as he has been at points in his life. But, I'm obviously a sort of more rural queer than I think he is, but there are, it's kind of, it's nice, I guess what I'm saying, is to feel that sense of communion with another queer soul, someone else who is as moved by things as I am. And I think he really captures also, the kind of bohemian life that he was leading in the 90s and 2000s in San Francisco, for example. And I think that, it's a bit of escapism for me. It's a life that I have never led. I'm just too boring and too, I'm just a country boy from West Virginia when it comes down to it. So I think there's something very delightfully escapist in that sense. And so I think there's a lot to be gained from queer books like this one. I read a lot of gay romance, I read a lot of gay fiction, but I really think it's helpful to read what's going on in the world of gay nonfiction too. And I mean, the book ends on a slightly melancholic note as he realizes that the song that they used in their wedding is actually a breakup song. And I mean, who amongst us hasn't faced that kind of terror? But I think that's appropriate that the novel should end with such a melancholy and sort of ambivalent note, since that seems to be the world that we live in. And, no victory is ever complete, and we're always out in a fight. So anyway, I really recommend Deep House, The Gayest Love Story Ever Told. It's a great piece of literature, a great contribution to queer writing, just generally speaking. It's just a genuine pleasure. It's not for the faint of heart. I mean, like I said, he spares no detail when it comes to sex, but I think that's a good thing, and I think that the more we can talk explicitly, frankly, and, in mature ways about sex, the better off we'll all be. And I think that that's a good place to end for today's edition of the Pisces Guide to Pop Culture. I'm, of course, your host, TJ, and I want to thank all of you for joining me, both for my talks about regular books, movies, TV, but also my own book, which just came out. But we'll talk about country road romance at some other time. For today, once again, thanks for joining me. I'm TJ, and take care, y'all.